Physical church, the church building, used to be a symbol kind of built into every landscape in the Western world, and the American landscape in particular, with the steeple and its presence in a town. When my family vacationed in the Hudson Valley this past summer, we went to an art museum and looked at some of the great paintings of the Hudson Valley School, and there was a painting of the New York skyline from the mid-1800s from this school. And so think about that skyline today. That painting showed one thing over and over and over again in that skyline: church steeples. The most defining thing that you saw in New York City in that time was church steeples. Here would have been one of them, the Church of the Pilgrims from Brooklyn. And the presence of these buildings still has a little bit of symbolic resonance of trust, fidelity, solidity, something that's straight, and in particular, a public presence in the community that spoke to all of those kinds of qualities, something that you can depend on. And you know, they built churches that way. They built them to last. This one is still standing, although I don't think the steeple is. That has all changed. And for me, it changed in 1 year, 1987. I was a sophomore in high school, and at the very beginning of that year, a preacher on TV named Oral Roberts, there's the groan, well-timed, he was up in his prayer tower, and he kind of lost me at prayer tower. But be that as it may, he had one, and he was in it. And he said God told him that if he didn't raise $8 million, that God was going to take him home. And so this became his fundraising campaign. And it was notorious. It was a scandal that a man would try to raise money by claiming that God was going to take his life if he didn't get the money. The fact is, it was more than successful. He actually raised $9.1 million, which is kind of an amazing thing. But as a high schooler, looking at this scandal, I basically was sick, like most people. Do I want to be associated with this? Quickly on the heels of that, there was a second scandal among televangelists, and that was Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. It began as a sex scandal, the way they normally do, and ended up as a money scandal. They had built this theme park called Heritage USA, and this theme park became a source of real estate wealth for the ministry. They were selling condos and who knows what all, and cooking the books, and so he went to prison eventually for fraud. So in the space of a couple of months in my sophomore year in high school, I was watching these scandals break open centered around money. And then quickly another scandal broke about Jimmy Swaggart, again starting out with sex, immorality, and ending up with money as they always do. And, you know, it's never stopped. It's ongoing up to the present day. It's almost like a feature of our modern Christian life that we think about church ministry, and there's always this question of fidelity, trust, truthfulness about money. And so those three incidents in 1987 were around the same time that in my home church, our pastor brought in a consultant to raise money for a building project. And for, I think, the then enormous fee of something like $30,000, this consultant came in and was going to, like, as they would say, fleece the flock. And he came in at the beginning of it and preached a sermon. He came in at the end of it and preached exactly the same sermon. So for that amount of money, you got one sermon delivered twice. And I was watching all of this and watching the outcome of it. It was not successful. I don't know whether it was tied to what was going on nationally or just things in the church. But I was watching all of this as a sophomore in high school, and it all convinced me that I had no desire to be a pastor. You see how that turned out. I didn't want anything to do with it. And because there was this stench of infidelity around pastoral ministry, and there still is. And so when I got into ministry, I found myself repeatedly in situations in churches where we needed significant revitalization in churches. The one that I had in Chico beginning in 2011, Chico, California, the thing was out of money. It was down to maybe 50 people in their 80s and 90s, and it was a desperate situation. They were not able to pay their mortgage, and it was going under. And what I confronted in that situation and many situations before was the reality that you have to fund ministry. And as the pastor, I needed to talk about it, and I needed to disciple people in this reality that ministry has to be resourced, it has to be funded. And at the beginning of it, it did not appear that I would be paid because they were upside down. And the thing had cratered that badly. So I had to own my role as somebody who was going to talk about money and develop that sense of fidelity and trust over a long period of time with that church and with any church that I served. Most churches make the mistake of not talking about money, procrastinating talking publicly about finances as a spiritual issue until it's too late. Either they're out of money and there's an obvious motivation, a kind of desperation to raise funds, and so any talk about money just lacks credibility at that point. It's too late to talk about money when you're in trouble. Or they wait until they've got some big building project that is needed and they need to finish it, and they can't unless they talk about money, but you've never talked about money, and now you're talking about it because you got the big project, and that also lacks credibility. The reality is that finances are about trust and fidelity, and you cannot gain either one of those things at the last minute. So we're starting this conversation today. We'll build our own way of talking about this as a community when there's nothing particular happening. We're not in trouble. We're growing. We are little by little doing things to our building. And so we'll talk about it now when it's not really necessary. But it is necessary, because we've got to come to a place of communicating together as a community about what it means to resource the church and how we're going to do that. I want this morning to begin that conversation just kind of taking the mystery out of this. How does this work? how is a church really funded and resourced? And I'm going to take you to this proverb, Proverbs 13 and verse 11. I'll give you the English Standard Version translation, and then I'll deny that it's true. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. We'll take a look at this proverb. It's true of our personal lives, family lives, and it's true of church communities. It's true of corporations. It's true of towns. It's true of governments. And so we're going to look at it from the point of view of our personal lives and from the point of view of church life, asking the question, as BG grows, what is the plan financially for how we resource the ministry? How does that actually happen? And lay some groundwork for that. So let's dive into this proverb here and look at the method of gathering resources, what this proverb calls, rightly, wealth. The minute we use that word, you would think that a church would not talk about gathering wealth, but I just want you to think about that word as just, let's not use euphemisms. I mean, I use the word resource ministry. The fact is we're talking about ministries gathering financial resources, money, wealth, so that it can do what it needs to do. And so one of the things that I have learned is get rid of the euphemisms. Get rid of the double talk. What we're talking about is dollars. Just so we're clear. So the proverb gives two contrasting ways to gain wealth. This is true of individuals and families. It's true of churches. And so here's the first one. You can gain wealth by vanity. Wealth gained hastily, the ESV says, will dwindle. It's really saying here, wealth gained by vanity. Wealth gained by a breath, a vapor. Wealth that comes and goes like smoke. So this might mean wealth gained by easy means or wealth gained by fraud. And so we've all seen the person or read about the person who wins the lottery and they get the $500 million lotto payout and then very quickly it's gone. We've all heard those kinds of stories, and those stories are not urban legends, they are true. Because when you get a lot of money by easy means, you don't have a sense of what that money is really worth and what that money really does. And because you don't have that sense, you just start spending it. Well, that's quite a total, even after taxes. Whatever $500 million is after taxes, that's a lot of money. We're never going to see the end of that. So we'll just start acquiring things and doing things and taking the vacations we want to and all of those kinds of things. And very quickly, much more quickly than we realize, it's gone. This happens to churches. They maybe don't win the lottery. They maybe don't strike oil. But churches can come into large sums of money very quickly. So I mentioned the church that I took in 2011 in Chico, California. And it was unable to pay its mortgage. As I said, it was out of money. It was going bankrupt, and it was going to close. And very first Sunday, the place was full. Second Sunday, money started coming in, and that church was in surplus for a good 18 months. Big surplus. Piled up a six-figure surplus because it had no budget. And they weren't spending any money. They didn't have any money. So all the money that came in was very suddenly making them feel like, wow, we can really do something now. We can really put a lot of funds into this kind of thing and that sort of thing. And what are we going to do with all of this money? And I told the board, you're not going to do a single thing with any of this money. You're going to sit on this surplus. And the reason you're going to do that is because none of these people are here for the same reason. There's no coherence to this ministry. There's no discipline in this ministry. If you talk to any of these people who have suddenly come here, there's one reason. That's because you got this new pastor, and he's doing his thing, and maybe they love this aspect of it or that aspect of it, but some of these people see a chance to do their gig at a new situation in a new church. They've got their own ambitions. If you don't understand that, you're not seeing how dangerous this situation is. That money's going to go away. It's going to go away fast. When we start honing what this ministry is really about, save it. Because you're going to have to survive the tough days to come when you're really imposing some discipline on what right now is basically a free-for-all. Money that comes quickly goes quickly, and it did. But that board did not spend all the money. They very wisely sat on it, saved it for the trouble that was coming, and when the troubled days came, the church was able to power through it because it had not misused a surplus gained hastily. So this does happen to churches where all of a sudden there's a large influx of funds. But remember this idea of wealth gained by vanity. Wealth gained like smoke. Easy come, easy go. That kind of wealth can also not just come by easy means, like getting a new pastor and suddenly everybody's excited. It can come by fraud. And I'm sorry to say that much of my time as pastor of different churches has been spent uncovering and dealing with the aftermath of fraud. There was a reason why that church cratered in Chico, California. There was a reason why it ran out of money. It was because the pastor defrauded that church, and it's still not clear why, or what the motivation was. When we uncovered it, they lawyered up and clammed up, and we never got any answers about that, because that's how it goes. But in that case, fraud was perpetrated on a congregation, and that happens. I'm sorry to say, it happens a lot. Churches end up leveraged to the hilt. If you listen to the podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, one of the things you'll learn is that as that church started to grow and as it started to plant churches, every one of those church plants were leveraged to pay for the next thing. It almost becomes like a big pyramid scheme, and many ministries are run this way. And so churches can acquire wealth, significant sums of money, by fraud. What would not pass inspection in any business. And the consequences of this are everywhere in the nation. They're in every town. There is I find, talking to different churches over the years, there is the same story over and over again. Big, growing ministry, collapse of ministry, and then we uncover the fact that it's all funded by loans. So, this proverb is certainly talking about personal finances, but It's also talking about community finances. So when we talk about the growth of BG, it's very important that you understand what I mean by that. I mean growth that is regular, moderate, and deep. Let me unpack what those three things mean. Growth, the kind of growth we're seeing right now, is regular growth. It's a steady accumulation of new people. Both, we've had a good fall for growing among students. We've had a good year for growing among people who live in this region. And we're very happy about both of those. That is steady growth. It's not sudden. It's not all of a sudden there's 100 more people than there were. No, it's just week on week. That's all. And so when I talk about growth as a good thing, I mean regular, steady growth. Growth that is moderate. Sudden growth in a church is a problem. It is a challenge. It is going to lead to turmoil. And so you can, in fact, engineer the ministry to goose it, to kind of give that sudden influx of people. In fact, much church planting philosophy is founded on the idea that you draw a crowd right away and then you sort out the details later. Not smart. Easy come, easy go. We want moderate growth, and so we're structuring the ministry so that we are able to build relationships with people who come here, not just attract a big crowd of people. So growth is very important. It needs to be regular, it needs to be moderate, and it needs to be deep. The point of building relationships with people who come here is so that they join in the spiritual growth that is happening here, and they join in at a deeper level where they feel, I am being fed by the Word of God, and I am becoming part of the purpose and the mission of this ministry. And I have a role in that. I'm not just coming to receive a performance on Sunday morning. I actually have a job here. I have a role. I have a place in this ministry. So the growth needs to be regular, needs to be moderate, and it needs to be deep. And my argument to you is that that kind of growth will lead to financial resources. It will lead to the church being resourced the way it needs to be resourced because we're doing the job that God has given us to do. So what we see in this very first part of this proverb is that churches can get faked out by the fantasy of fast growth, explosive growth, and fast money. Both of them are fantasies, they are frauds, and they will dwindle. And eventually they will disappear. Here's the second part of this proverb. Wealth gained like a vapor or a breath will dwindle. But whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Literally, this is whoever gathers by hand. Think about that. If you've got leaves covering your grass on your property, which we did a few weeks ago, how are you going to get rid of them? Well, you can get a big machine, and maybe there's a machine that sort of sucks them all up or something. I don't know. Maybe that exists. You can get a big blower. You can get several blowers, and you can blow them to a different location, maybe the neighbor's lawn. You can do that. Or, by hand, you can rake it. And you can clear it one section at a time. You can gather those leaves. You say, who wants to do that? Just give me the blower. Get it done fast. Okay, with leaves, I'm with you. But with resources, and here I'm not just talking about finances, monetary wealth. I'm talking about a different kind of wealth from which dollars are the overflow. The real wealth is in a sense of common unity and mission among the entire congregation. And that unity, that's built over time. That's a vision that all of us come to share over a period of years, not a period of weeks, not a period of months, years together, working on the calling that God has given us as a church in this place. And so when person by person, conversation by conversation, meeting by meeting, program by program, you gather this kind of wealth by hand, slowly, if I can put it this way, intimately. If you pull this together, one soul at a time, one family at a time, then what you have is a kind of deep unity that results in a wealth of talent, ideas, diligence, persistence, stick-to-itiveness, work ethic, all of the things that make a church, including dollars. That's how it's done. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers by hand, one piece at a time, one thing at a time, will increase the wealth. It will grow. It will, in fact, multiply. And so when you think about that church in Chico, where we started with 50 people, and then on the first Sunday it exploded, and then it shrank, and then it grew at a more regular, moderate, deep pace. And we began to build partnerships with all sorts of people, and those partnerships began to flourish. Now you say, yeah, okay, so you drew in well-heeled donors and built partnerships with them. No. My partnerships were with addicts from down the street at the rehab center who were required to go to church. Those were my partnerships. My partnerships were with blue-collar people, retired people, people who work with their hands, people who didn't have a lot of resources. My partners were butchers, grocers, mechanics. Those were my partners. And what happened out of that is that people started doing things together. And the more they worked on the calling that God had placed on their lives and on the life of that church, energy began to build. And momentum began to build. We started a house for men who had graduated from the rehab program so that they could not go somewhere else where they did not have a place to live and end up back in the rehab program, but could have a stable home from which they could get a job and become part of a church community, the church community where maybe they found the Lord and learned His ways, and where they're known by the people care about them week after week, that kind of thing. It's really very simple. And so energy like that started to build in this church. And it compiled over time. You build those partnerships. How do you do that? One person at a time. One family at a time. And the more people in that church who see themselves gathering partners by hand, intimately, the more people are doing that, the faster the thing turns around and the faster things change. I'm telling you this not because BG is at this level. It's not. BG is far beyond this level. BG is far stronger than that church was. It is no comparison. And it's stronger relationally, it's stronger financially. I'm telling you this because you may be feeling that BG is not where it was few years ago, so it's weaker. I'm telling you, in the context of today's ministry, in which churches are closing across this country, in the context of church ministry where everybody has 2 or 3 pastor fraud stories, in that context, BG is amazingly strong and amazingly well. And that strength is something the Lord is going to use to recraft his ministry in this region. I don't say Ithaca, I mean the region, the Finger Lakes region. And he's going to do it as we gather by hand, one person at a time, one family at a time. It's slow, or it feels slow at the beginning, but at the level that BG is at right now, this is going to compile much more quickly than it has in other churches where I have served. So, here's our principle from Proverbs 13:11. If you gain wealth fast, you get faked out by the amount of money that has dropped in your lap. You think you've got resources, but you have no idea what those resources are really worth. If you gain the wealth slowly, deeply, regularly, and moderately, if you gain it by hand, little by little, it will stay, it will grow, it will increase, and the ministry will be resourced. So that's the principle that I have been working on for decades now. I came to the conclusion when God dragged me into the pastorate, which is literally the case, that I needed to get over 1987. I needed to get over it because I don't have to do it the way those shysters did it. The way they did it didn't work, and doesn't work, and never will work, because it's fraud. So we can do it differently. And in part of getting over 1987 and that formative year in my Christian experience was acknowledging that God's people are generous, they are frugal and thrifty, and they are resourceful. And that if you build on those qualities, God's ministry will be resourced. And so I'm telling you all of this just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from on this issue. Before we get into some details here, looks like I've got a couple of questions. There is a complementary wealth in a church, namely expertise and labor. This can be more valuable than mere money, but also enables people without money to contribute meaningfully to a mission. What do you think the relationship is between these elements and a church reaching its mission? this gives me an excuse to comment on this more. So your particular skills are crucial for us as a church community to determine what God is calling us to do. Let me put it this way. Vision for a church and a church discovering its mission, these things are not announced on Sunday morning. They are discovered over a period of years by all the people together. And how do we do this? The normal way, by saying, hey, this person has skills over here. And these skills really help us in these areas. So let's start working with him or her in these areas. And we see the skills come with other things that are very important. Collegiality, flexibility, adaptability, resourcefulness, persistence when there's difficulty and trouble, commitment and loyalty. When you have all those qualities, and you know what it's like to work with that kind of person, they have a skill, but their skill is not just what they're about. They're really about contributing to your well-being and the well-being of the whole community, not just doing their gig. So as a church, over a period of years, as we work together on all of these different things, and we start to discover, wow, there are a lot of skills in this room. And when we really start to appreciate that and work with it, then it becomes clearer to us how big our reach is as a church. I would put it to you, if you've been around BG a long time, you're thinking of the church as shrunk. You're thinking of the reach of BG as going like this. That is not what I see. And I hope that you will actively seek out how through each person who comes to the church, the reach and the network of BG is actually growing exponentially. And so I'm challenging you this morning to think differently about the capabilities of this congregation. I know it has been a very discouraging period for BG over the last number of years. But what we have to do is ask, what is God doing next? And the past is going to play into that, and it's going to have continuity with that. So this comment here about the wealth of skills is crucial, and it's crucial to our understanding what God will call us to do as a church in the next 25 years. Those skills are already here in this room. We just need to pay attention to them. So a very important comment there. Another question, what does BG's leadership do to safeguard against the types of fraud and mismanagement that you spoke about? Several things. We have a fully developed system of accounting. Our treasurer and our bookkeeper keep track of all of these funds, and we are accountable to them. Every ministry leader is accountable to that central system, and our treasurer, Beth Thorpe, is the ace of all of this. She has the institutional knowledge of what has gone on in the past, and she has a bird's eye view of everything that is going on financially right now. There are funds that are dedicated to certain purposes. And so these designated funds, we cannot simply spend them. We have to debate the idea, we have to give approval for these things, and only after approval is given can we dedicate that money. Sometimes the approval is at the congregational level, where the members get together and vote on a particular project. So, for example, we did a kitchen remodel. That was not a top-down thing. That was a set of bottom-up ideas from the renovation committee that then came to the elders. The elders said yes, and the proposal for the changes to the kitchen and the funds to pay for it went to our membership back in July, and it was approved. So there are all of these kinds of safeguards. There are safeguards for me. I have accounts that I spend from, but I turn in receipts for those accounts. And those receipts are, going to the, did you really spend this money on this? And, you have to document all of that stuff. And so I have no access to any church funds but what I have been delegated by the congregation in a budget that was voted on by the members. So in ministries where this is not the case, there often aren't budgets, or if they are, they're kind of mystery documents. Nobody can get them. They don't have any authority. And when ministries are committing fraud, generally you're always going to find somebody who's got their fingers on the books, and it's usually a pastor, a relative of the pastor, or somebody like that. This is where that kind of criminality begins. So one of the things that impressed me about BG when we were interviewing with the church was how open the search committee was with the books. I got all the books for like 3 years running so that I could look at them. And they, the committee, the elders were all just sort of like, he's not going to come. I love that. That's transparency. And that's the foundation of trust and fidelity over finances. So those are some of the things that we have in a well-developed system. And so these are very good questions here. Let's talk about how this works. It's tempting to imagine the church is going to be resourced financially by a few small donors, a few large donors. And the numbers tell that story, 20% of the donors give 80% of the total and so forth. You've all heard that kind of stuff. And you hear it because it's generally true. It's a rule of thumb for a reason. Here's what I've found. You can broaden the number of people participating, and individually as families. Maybe they don't give a lot in the scheme of things. But if that number grows, the resources available to the church multiplies enormously. So that church I mentioned in Chico, California, it was bankrupt, then it was flush, then it had to survive a period of turmoil where it was refining its mission. It came out of that period just kind of no cash reserves. We're just bumping along, and anything could have happened. But by hand, little by little, person by person, we built those relationships, and when things went right with the funding and we hit our marks, I went to the congregation and said, "We hit our marks. The Lord has provided, and He provided through you. Thank you." That was the extent of my fundraising. From that, we grew a church budget in a poor area with a small congregation, smaller than BG, to above between $300,000 and $400,000 a year from bankruptcy. And how was it done? It was done through broadening the small gifts, the number of people participating. Here's my challenge to you. Be one of those. Give a little. Give what you can. If you say, well, I can't make that big a difference, believe me, adding to the number of givers makes a massive difference in the life and resources of the church. And every year, we all come to the place where we look at the budget for the next fiscal year and we say, this is expensive. And we say, I can't do anything. I can't make a meaningful contribution to close the gap that appears to be there. I don't have those resources. This is the moment when everybody looks at that bill for doing ministry and says, I can't do it. When you have to take a conscious step and say, but God will do it through all of us. I will do what I can, and God will provide through all of us acting together. That's how this works. And when this happens, when you're a participant like this is what you find when congregations talk about seeing the Lord. We saw the Lord provide. We saw it all together. That's what's happening. Everyone doing what they can, and the number of participants growing, and they all, because they have a little window into the need, they all see what the Lord does through the process. So who provides it? Do we or does the Lord? The Lord provides it. He uses us. And there's always something unexpected about that. My dad, who's here this morning, was a director of operations at a large church in California. And someone on staff, as they approached the end of the year, there was a bit of a gap, and they said, oh, well, you know, the big donors will get us, they'll get us across the line. Dad had access to who was giving. You need to know I do not have access to who is giving, and I do not want that access. But someone has it, and it's because it's part of the accounting of our church. So he had that role in that church. He said, you're making a serious mistake. It's the widows, it's the regular small givers who got us to this point, and the Lord used them to get us to this point. The big donors did not. We have to change our thinking about this. That it is somebody else who has more resources who is going to carry this. No, we all carry this. I am not, my family, we are not recipients in this process. We are participants. We are givers with you. And this has been something that we have been amazed. And I've told you this before earlier in the fall. What the Lord has enabled us to give while we were not looking. We were just giving little by little, week by week. And broaden the number of givers. That's the goal. Secondly, when we do that, many small changes make a huge impact over time. And I have seen this over and over again. I've seen this in capital campaigns where you're raising money to do large building projects. And I've seen what the Lord can do through small and moderate donations. It is powerful. And it is how we all see this together. But again, where does this come from? It comes from the fact that we are also and constantly ministering to each other. And out of that togetherness comes the participation, and out of that participation comes the overflow of dollars. We need those dollars, but we don't get them by calling for them, manipulating people, guilting people into giving them. We don't get the dollars by putting a thermometer up on the stage that never moves. It's not how we do this. We do this by ministering to each other and participating together.